don't know that it's always the case that a kid or somebody finds porn. It can be like porn finds them. In my late teen to early 20s is when I thought, okay, this is something that I really don't want in my life, but I didn't know how to get rid of it. For me, that journey was, I am just a shell of a person wandering around this life, pretending like everything's okay, but really deep down inside, I mean, this has nothing to do with pornography and sexual addiction. There's a hole in my heart that I was trying to satisfy and fill in many different unhealthy ways. So I said, you know what? I got to try doing this differently. And step one of that is love myself and love those around me.
Hi, welcome to MedCircle's It's All in Your Head podcast. I'm your host, Jackie Colbeth, and it's great to be with you. After experiencing my own mental health struggles, I know the value in sharing our lived experiences. So at MedCircle, we've launched It's All in Your Head, is that place where you can hear what life is like straight from the source. Today, we're going to be talking about what it's like to live with a sex or pornography addiction. While I think most of us are familiar with sex addiction, I think that pornography addiction is something we can all afford to learn more about. After all, it's easily accessible, it's free, and it's produced on a massive scale. But just like any other behavioral disorder, it can have a devastating impact on your self-esteem, your loved ones, and your physical health. I am so excited to introduce Austin Hamilton as our guest today. Austin has been in recovery from a sex and pornography addiction and really opens up to us today about what that journey has been like for him and his family. Today, Austin is a business owner and also travels across the country, sharing his story and mentoring others who share in his struggle. He is an inspiration to so many, and we're very pleased he could take time out of his very busy schedule to chat with us. Austin, welcome to It's All in Your Head. Austin, thank you so much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you on, and we're looking so forward to hearing your story.
Thanks for having me. I am excited and honored to be here.
Oh, well, that's awesome. I can't wait for our viewers to get to know more about you, as it's been such a pleasure. So I think what our audience might be wondering to start off is, when were you first exposed to pornography?
I can't exactly put my finger on it, but sure. Around the age of 10, so I was born in 1985, 37 years old, do the math. Around the age of 10, I would say my parents were on the leading or bleeding edge of technology. Yeah. And so I got a computer in my room with full unfettered access to the internet in 1995. And now we know that might not be the best idea. But back then, the internet was new. So I have this saying, I don't know that it's always the case that a kid or somebody finds porn. It can be like porn finds them. And it can be in relatively innocent ways. So
when did you think, starting young, when did you think this was maybe moving from more of just like a pleasure, kind of harmless escape? I call it moving from pleasure to problematic.
So when did it move from pleasure to problematic? That's a good question. I would say I may not have had the realization until maybe 5-10 years ago as an adult that it's problematic. Mm-hmm. What tends to happen in the addiction cycle, and that word even labeling it as an addiction is something that I didn't want to apply for a long time until I got more educated. Sure. But what I say, and I deal with a lot of men who struggle with pornography and sexual addiction, is that, do you think it's a problem? Have you tried stopping? Can you stop? Have you been successful at stopping? And if you answer those questions a certain way, I would label it as an addiction. So for me, I would say probably in my late teen to early 20s is when I thought, okay, this is something that I really don't want in my life, but I didn't know how to get rid of it. Sure. And there's this notion a lot of times in the way that the addiction cycle goes with this is that it's like, okay, when I get a girlfriend, I'll stop this. When I graduate high school, I'll stop this. Okay, when I graduate college, when I get engaged, when I get married, you see, this never ends. Sure. And I would say, for me, I definitely followed that pattern, even bringing it into my marriage. And, it just becomes so big of a problem that it can feel hopeless that we can never get rid of it. But I'd say, to sum it up for me, probably late teens, early 20s is when I said, okay, this is a problem that I don't want in my life, but I just don't know how to get rid of it.
Absolutely. I can relate. In my struggle getting off alcohol was I can't imagine life with it, and I can't imagine life without it. And it's sort of that vulnerable crux where, do I have the courage to look at it, or am I not ready yet? So I think a lot of people can certainly relate to that. If you could describe maybe how you were feeling in the earliest part of your recovery. I think that there's a lot of different emotions that people might feel in the early stages when they're first being introduced to a recovery program or changing their lifestyle. So I'm wondering if you could add color to maybe the emotions, thoughts, or feelings that you had early on in your recovery.
Yeah. So the recovery journey, I mean, first somebody has to get to a point to where they're sick and tired of it and they're ready to make a change. And so for me, that happened about 5 years ago. I've been married 11 years to the same woman. I was unfaithful to her in my marriage about a year after I got married. And that behavior lasted for a period of time. I then stopped that behavior, kept it all in, and then it basically killed me not confessing that. So it wasn't until about 5 years ago that I said, okay, I need to do something different. So for me, and there's two ways that guys can get caught or come out, so to speak. It's you either get convicted or you get caught. So I was convicted to get this off my chest. So for me in my journey, it was, okay, I realized that I am a terrible husband, a terrible father, a terrible son, a terrible employee, employer, everything. I shouldn't say I realized it. That's what I imputed on myself. And so I was like, I got to do this differently. This is just not working in life. By that point, I had one kid, another one on the way. And so for me, that journey was, I am just a shell of a person wandering around this life, pretending like everything's okay. But really deep down inside, I mean, this has nothing to do with pornography and sexual addiction. There's a hole in my heart that I was trying to satisfy and fill in many different unhealthy ways. So where my journey started, I realized, okay, in life, I had a sales job that I did pretty well at. All I cared about in life was I was selling a product I didn't believe in to people who I didn't like, to try to make money for shareholders who I'll never meet, so I can buy stuff that I'll eventually throw away in order to impress people who I really don't care about. That's what I was up to in life. Yeah. Didn't work very well. So I said, you know what? I got to try doing this differently. And step one of that is love myself and love those around me. And so that's what kind of put me on the process or the path of doing a lot of healing work, therapy, coaching, counseling. I've done, experiential workshops, all sorts of different things to say, okay, where is that pain coming from, and how do I even begin to heal from that?
Right. So, Austin, I know how addictions can ravage personal relationships. And while it's really difficult, I know, to talk about that, I'm wondering if you could shed some light for our audience for their own edification, and so they might be able to pick up and take away something from this. But how did that affect your marriage?
How did it affect my marriage? Okay. Where do we start? How much time do we have?
I'd love to give you hours. I know. Mm-hmm.
So, it affected every aspect of my marriage, of every aspect of my life, specifically in marriage. I mean, what tends to be produced in an addiction cycle, especially with pornography and sexual addiction, is there's an uncanny ability for people, but I'll say men, to be deceitful, to hide, to lie. And now it just makes me sick. It's like the things I was capable of doing without my wife knowing and hiding it from her and thinking I was doing such a great job at keeping it all together. It's like, man, if half that energy was spent towards good during that season, who knows what I could have produced. With that comes control. So in an addictive cycle, we want to control everything. I remember there's instances in our marriage where I would literally like hover over my wife and tell her like there is a a correct way and an incorrect way to butter toast. And she, of course, does it the incorrect way. And I had to tell her the correct way to do it. And if she didn't do that and agree with me, then she was bad and wrong. And I just condemn her for it. Okay, so now that's a real example and a very silly example, but it's like she couldn't do anything right in my eyes. All right. So now what that was me just like, I'm so not comfortable with who I was that I had to take it out on somebody else. And so, I mean, you can imagine how that plays out in a marriage and then have kids. All right. So now it's almost magnified with kids and other people in the house. But just every aspect of life became about hiding things and controlling things. And it's so exhausting to do that. So that, we talk about this concept of taking the mask off. It's like, well, at some point I had to take the mask off of that and say, oh, I just need to release this control and this desire to hide. And it's much more freeing on that side of it. Now, is it always easy to do that? No. I mean, do I still have preferences that I want? Yeah. But something I joke about, when I deal with guys, I don't joke about it, but guys in many cases who are engaged in this behavior, they're terrified of their significant other finding their phone.
Yes.
Because what might she find? And I was the same way. It's like, I would get nervous when my wife was in the same building as my phone. Now it's like, whatever, you want my phone? Here's my phone. But that deceit and the hiding, I mean, it was just devastating to my family and everybody around us.
Yep. And how do you think your wife got through this, so to speak? I imagine through a lot of patience, a lot of love. I'm wondering if you can describe how your wife was feeling. I'm sure that there's been some dialogue over the last 5 years and her expressing herself to you, your acknowledgement of any controlling behavior. But I'm wondering if there are any particular adjectives or a way that you can relay just how your spouse was feeling.
Yeah, I mean, well, the real answer, you'd have to ask her. I can tell you how I think she felt.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have wanted to live with myself during that season. I mean, it wasn't even fun for me.
Right.
But I think I have to grieve who I was during that time and who I created or what I created in our household. I think I constantly, in trying to cover up for my insecurities and not feeling loved or lovable, what I actually created with my wife is that she wasn't good enough. And nothing she could do would be good enough up to my standards. And that manifested itself everywhere. Even when we had our first child, I thought I can do everything better than anybody else. So I would try to change as many diapers as I could for our oldest son. And that was out of a place of my hurt, thinking I need to prove to everybody how good I am. Now, what did I rob my wife of during that time is it's almost like I butted her out of the way of mothering during that season, during part of that season of when he was young. And like, I have to grieve that. We have to grieve that of like what we lost as a family and maybe the care and nurturing that our oldest son may not have gotten during that time. Because I mean, that I would say is probably the most significant unintended consequence of my behavior was like, well, now it's affecting other people, but my son and then my daughter who came in shortly thereafter. But just this contemptuous way of being that I used to hold and having that inside the home of basically, I'm better than, I can do things better than, I mean, I have to lament that. I have to grieve that and I do, of what I created, what I produced during that time and how it affected my wife and my family. And we're now really in this process of unpacking that. What was lost? How can we name what was lost during that season? My wife essentially had to hold together the family in those years afterwards. Because, I mean, think about it. This was the biggest betrayal of her life. I mean, and she was 8 months pregnant, by the way, when I told her this. So it's like she got hit by a bus. And now, given how my story unfolded, it's like, oh, look at Austin. That's so great. He's so free of this.
Right.
Well, there's a whole nother topic called partner betrayal trauma, which is the trauma the partner feels when they're betrayed. And then have a C-section 30 days later. Okay. So, I also have to, whatever my wife wants in terms of look at my phone, stalk my location, all that. That's what I signed up for the rest of my life.
Yep.
Now that doesn't happen very often anymore, but sure, there's flashbacks for my wife of like, oh, what could he be doing? What else could he be hiding? I brought something to her just a couple months ago, and she was like, oh, like just a reminder of like the depths of deceit in my heart. Who knows? And so that betrayal, like it's not. I don't believe that you get over that, so to speak. It is now part of our story. Mm-hmm. And everything is different now for our marriage going forward.
Yep. And a lot of people statistically, when one person recovers in a relationship, the odds are very slim ultimately of them staying together. But you and your wife managed to make that work. And I'm wondering, would you credit, well, certainly your honesty and your willingness to gain the trust back, which is obvious. Was there any sort of counseling, couples counseling, anything you think that may have helped your wife deal with this?
First of all, I don't know how anybody, marriage or any relationship, I don't know how anybody ever stays together in a human relationship. It's just unbelievable what people do. Now, the possibility of love, that's where it can happen. And truly, what does it mean to truly love somebody? It's like, I will put aside my wishes, wants, and desires for the benefit of another person. And to actually do that is really hard. What resources? I mean, we've both been in counseling and therapy, psychotherapy. I've done EMDR. My wife's done a number of different modalities as well.
Yeah.
We've done joint therapy. We've done all sorts of things that really talking about the story, talking about our core longings and desires and getting to the root of that and joining in that vision. I think that's what has been helpful is we can actually have shared language to talk about what's going on in our life instead of just, I'll speak for myself only. When she doesn't show up the way I want to, well, I'm going to use the only tool I know how. I'm a hammer, everything else is a nail, and that's how everybody's going to get treated. So like that doesn't work. So, and I believe it's a lifelong process. Like to live an authentic relationship, it's really hard.
Yes.
It's really hard. I might want to bring something to my wife and say, okay, you know what? I'm going to tell you this. It's going to be difficult, but we'll get through it. This is just me trying to express what's actually going on in my true self and being intimate. There's a definition for the word intimate that I love. It's into me see. So to offer someone intimacy is actually saying like, here's what's really going on the inside. Yeah. And it is contagious, I believe. When one party is being intimate, it's usually reciprocated. But yeah, being able to just authentically share in life with my wife it's such a gift. And, do I wish that all this happened in my life? No. Am I really glad for what we have today? Absolutely.
Well, I thank you so much for shedding light into that. I know that these are probably questions I should be asking your wife, but I also know that you're able through all your work and dedication to give us that description from your heart. So I definitely, I wish you guys all the best. I really do. And I'm so impressed with the support that you've gotten specifically from your wife, because that can be quite hard in situations like this. But something tells me she's a pretty amazing woman and you're a very lucky man. And I'm wondering if there was I have people ask this of me a lot when I quit drinking, that, did you get a DUI? Did you get busted doing this? And I did not. It was just, I came to that on my own accord, to your point. And I'm wondering if there for you was any certain event or like an epiphany. And sometimes it's not that cut and dry, but just wondering if there was a certain event, scenario, or epiphany that you came to when you were like, okay, I've known this has been hard for me to stop, but this is the day I decided to stop?
Yeah, August 15th, 2017, 5:05 p.m. That's the day and the time. It just came down to looking at the feedback in life that I was getting. So, I never had a substance problem. Obviously, you mentioned a DUI, like that can be I would assert that can be a gift to people who struggle with alcohol. Now, obviously you have to go through a bunch of undesirable things, but you got what I'm saying. It can be a wake-up call.
Sure.
For me and what I struggled with, it was more of just, I felt like I couldn't express love to people and to my family, those who I claimed that I cared about the most. Yeah. And I just wanted to stop that. With pornography and sexual addiction, what tends to happen also is you have to get into more and more risky behavior to keep the dopamine rush going. What might start as, a kid sees their dad or grandpa's XYZ magazine when they're a kid. Okay, that piques interest, that becomes normal. Now let's go to the next thing. And, anything from prostitutes to casual encounters on various different websites. I mean, you have to get more risky in order to keep that going. And that's just the game that's played until you get convicted to do something different. So I wouldn't say necessarily there was a specific type of behavior I was engaged with that said, oh, I need to stop. It was more, what am I producing in life and claiming to produce with those who are producing with those who I claim to love around me, and what am I actually receiving back from that? What feedback am I getting back from that? Yeah. Now I say I'm a gentle, courageous man, and I seek to create more hope and love in the world. I'm a gentle, courageous man, and I seek to create hope and love in the world. So now I can look at what the world is telling me. Am I doing that? And now I think I actually attain that goal more of the time. But back then it was, I'm contemptuous. I see people as objects. I'm just so selfish, and that didn't really work very well. A good definition of love that I heard recently is the willful surrender of power for the sake of another. And that's really landed with me. I look at my marriage, I was engaged in behavior I didn't want. It's all selfish. But I willfully surrendered that power, so to speak, for the sake of another. And so it's been a helpful mind change for me.
Absolutely. And have you gotten any clarity as to, I know in my own experience, it was sort of, you had mentioned like, there's a hole in my soul. I don't really know. I'm trying all different things to fill it. Mine was alcohol. And then upon getting into recovery, getting sober, then the onus is almost on you or us to think, okay, how did we think that hole even really came to be? And lots of different life experiences, I think, play into that. And I'm wondering if you've done any exploration into, possibly how that got started.
Oh boy, that's the big question. So where did that hole come from, and what did I do with that? So the journey really started for me in many ways. My wife and I went to a marriage conference. This was 5 years ago. And I thought, you know what? Yeah, our marriage is okay. We'll go to this marriage conference. I'm a decent husband. Maybe I can learn something from this.
Sure.
This is prior to confessing to my wife. And I had said this phrase before a number of times, casually. I thought I believed it. And I said this in the marriage conference. I said, if I died, my wife would be a disaster. Like, she would not be able to recover without me because I'm just so awesome. And if she died, I'd be fine. Like, yeah, I'd find somebody else. I'd probably be sad for a couple months, but I'd recover, marry somebody again. They'd help raise the kids and be on our way.
Yeah. And
so the person facilitating this workshop said, do you actually believe that? And I was like, yeah. Follow-up question. Did you have any trauma in your life growing up? I was like, yeah. Do you mind sharing? Okay, sure. What I said was just like this. My mom died when I was 5, but it hasn't affected me.
Wow.
Okay. Wow. The person says, oh, what? What did you say? My mom died when I was 5, but it hasn't affected me. So I doubled down on it, right? And I said it with that angry tone. Translation, please stop talking about this. This is very uncomfortable for me. We can't go to this level. The pain is too great. And so fortunately, I think it's one of the greatest gifts that I've had in life is this person they called my bluff, right? I'd said that so many times. My mom died when I was 5, but it hasn't affected me. And nobody, at least I didn't receive anybody diving into that and saying, you want to talk about this a little bit? So over the course of the weekend, what I realized was, oh my gosh, I have this huge hole in my heart from that and other things, but that being the biggest capital T traumatic event that I had in my life. And well, no wonder you're acting out. No wonder you're cheating on your wife or was cheating on my wife, looking at porn, doing all these things, trying to seek love, right? If I get this grade or sell this product or make this amount of money or do this thing, will I get love back? That was my whole MO in life. Will I be loved? I believe that's a core underlying longing of humans is, will I be loved?
Yes.
And I didn't find it in all those places. Now, for me in my healing journey, I'm a follower of Jesus. And so I believe, for me, I'm not asking anybody else to believe this, but for me, it's like, well, the teachings of Jesus and what Jesus offers in the death, burial, and resurrection, like that's it. There's no greater act of love. And I can rest in that assurance of, oh, I am loved. I have a heavenly Father who loves me, and that's enough. Now, believing that every second of every day, now it's a whole nother story, but for me, that's kind of the, growing up Christian and then having this overwhelming realization of, oh my gosh, that has to be true. That for me was like, it changed everything. So now it's not like everything was fixed right then. I still had to dive in and do the work, primarily actually facing the trauma of losing my mom at such a young age.
Sure. And however you receive help, we're all here for it. Any religion, etc. However you receive help, we are here for it. And I'm wondering if Christianity, I find it interesting in a very great way that they have really embraced pornography and sex addictions. And I'm wondering if they have any sort of programs or anything for those who are trying to recover.
Yeah, so that's a good question. What type of recovery programs are out there? I lead a study. It's called the Conquer series. It is a faith-based tool, and I joke it's probably the best faith-based tool out there, and therefore the best tool. Because, my opinion, I don't think that the secular world cares so much about combating this problem. Right? I'm being facetious in that, but it's the religious world. It is something that they talk about a lot. Yeah. And I would say with, one of the things I think for me in my journey, and I deal with a lot of guys in this, is people can tend to think, take infidelity, for example. Infidelity is only when there's intercourse between a party outside the marriage. Yeah. Okay. So, I thought that was true too. Like, okay, well, I haven't done that yet, so therefore I haven't cheated on my spouse. All right. Well, no. But in the teachings of Jesus, he basically said, I'm paraphrasing, but you so much as look at somebody in the wrong way, you look at a woman in the wrong way, and you've committed adultery in your heart. So there's the parable, who ye without sin cast the first stone. Okay, well, nobody cast a stone because everyone was convicted that, oh gosh, okay, I get it. I think that's something that for me, it unlocks a lot for people when they can realize that is, oh, I'm just looking at porn. It's not that bad. No, it's basically the same thing as sleeping around outside the context of your marriage or whatever committed relationship you're in. Now in the church, that's a whole conversation. We could spend hours there. But what I would say is, first of all, the statistics on pornography and sexual addiction are pretty alarming. Yeah. Roughly 2/3 of men, have some sort of sexual addiction. Yep. Okay. It's actually like 68%. And then amongst pastors in the church, it's like 59%.
Wow.
In my opinion, that's kind of the same number. Like it's in the same ballpark. So 2/3 of all men. And then roughly like 95% have at least some sort of, say, casual porn problem. And then for women, it's not as alarming. It tends to show up different in women, but women, it's around 25-30% would have some sort of sexual addiction. I say that very loosely.
Sure.
I also say, you don't like my data, the study I'm citing. Okay, say it's half wrong. It's still alarming, right?
Now, I know a lot of our viewers, and me included, we're pretty familiar with 12-step programs. Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, and, they have their 12 steps and their tenets. And I'm wondering if you could maybe walk us through if there's any sort of similar structure as far as, taking the steps to rectify things, whether that's making an amends to those you've hurt. I'm really curious, just because I know it's not a 12-step program, which is all I know, if there's any certain structure that you have in these groups.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, 12 steps, first step, correct me if I'm wrong, is basically admitting you're powerless over the behavior.
Yes.
Right. So there's something I say, I have been porn and sex outside my marriage free for 5 years. It's not even a temptation, but is lust still a problem? Yeah. I don't think anybody can ever truly not have a lustful thought or intent. So just when I lead these groups, I make it very clear. I'm not a teacher from a position of I have beat this, but I might be a couple steps ahead of you in one area and a couple steps behind in another, but we're in this journey together.
Yep.
Now I'll just touch on a few points with that. Disclosure, the concept of disclosure is a really hard thing to do and nobody wants to do it. Okay, so what's disclosure? It's when you tell your spouse or significant other or friend, right? I'm not assuming everybody's married who made, I know not everyone's married who deals with this and wants to stop the behavior, but
Sure.
being able to disclose it with somebody else, bringing it to the light is vitally important to the path to healing. And the reason is, shame will just eat us alive if we keep it in. And typically shame is a result of not grieving something, or there may be shame and grief tied up together. But those things, shame particularly, it'll just fester if kept inside. So saying what it is that we did, what we regret, it's important. When I confessed to my wife, she was 8 months pregnant. Even my therapist at the time was like, she's 8 months pregnant? I don't know if I'd do that right now. Okay, well, did it anyways, and I lived to tell the tale. We lived to tell the tale. But that's something that it's daunting. It's like, well, nobody wants to wake up and talk about their deepest, most, in many ways, perverted, messed up,
Sure.
sexual stuff. But I believe it's one of the core tenets of the path to healing. In addition to that, it's, again, I talked about those purity groups or accountability groups tend to sometimes aren't helpful. The notion of saying, stop looking at porn, stop masturbating, stop acting out, stop cheating, that doesn't work because we're not replacing it with anything. Mm-hmm. Can that happen for a period of time? Sure. But if we're not replacing the behavior with something else that's more productive, it'll either continue and persist in the same way, or it'll go to a different addiction. So the what I kind of embody for myself and then also work with others on is, what are you replacing that with? So I believe you can't be engaged in porn or acting out or infidelity and love your wife, kids, family, whatever it is at the same time. So if you're looking here, if you're like, I watch porn and masturbate every day, that means you're not loving your family. You can switch between them, but I don't think you can fully live in one or the other. So it tends to be like a chameleon. Yeah. So which way is your sword pointing? That's the analogy here. Are you protecting your family from this? Or if you're engaging in this behavior, you're basically pointing your sword at your family and attacking them. And that's what I did.
Yes.
Not a very good thing.
No, I get it. It's almost like the line, you're only as sick as your secrets when it comes to disclosure. And I also found that to be true. How did friends and family, personally, I had a mixed bag of reactions when I entered recovery. And I'm wondering, I'm sure most people I think are great and want to support, but I'm wondering, family, friends, was there anyone who maybe didn't understand, or you were looking for support from, but maybe, they just didn't have it to give? I'm wondering exactly, who were your biggest support systems, and if you had anybody in your life that maybe did not understand.
Great question. I don't think I've had anybody in my life who didn't understand.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I also think when confessing, there's this notion of like scraping the pot clean. So guys are awful. People are awful, but I'll speak to my experience mostly with guys, are awful at coming clean with whatever it was they're doing. And my therapist at the time gave me this analogy. It's like scraping a pot of chili when you're done cooking. You reach in, you think you got it all. Then it's like, wait, nope, there's more. So we got to keep going in. I think when the pot is scraped clean or clean enough, that's where more freedom can be accessed, right? So again, there's not a lot of shame that's being held behind. Now, sharing your story is really hard. So I made this declaration 5 years ago when I did a workshop. And my declaration was, I'm going to share my story with 5 people in Phoenix because I want to be a catalyst for hope and healing for men and their marriages. That was like the scariest thing ever 5 years ago, was to share this story with 5 people. Oh, yeah. And since then, I've shared in many different settings at churches, in other secular environments as well. I lead these groups. And now here we are doing this podcast. The point is sharing your story and doing it in a way to where you can draw people into empathy and compassion instead of judgment is important. And I think to do that, you have to be genuine about it. If I was sitting here telling this story and talking about, porn and sex addiction and why it's bad, blah, 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 but I still have a problem, all right, you're going to see right through that. Right. Then I also think, I've kind of plumbed the depths of this thing with, again, where did that pain come from? And so with my story, again, with my mom dying when I was 5, and that leading to a destabilization of where do I get love from? Yeah, I had to dive into that. And so I actually called people who knew my mom. So my mom was a pilot. She died flying a plane. Wow. With another 1 or 2 passengers as well. And so I called the people. My sister and I were at a family friend's house on that day. And I remember, at least it was told to me, that my dad came home that day and knocked on the door and said, "Hey, your mom's dead." Ooh. Okay. Yeah, who is right? No, I don't remember a lot about her. Sure. But what I did was, this was only about a year ago, I called that family. So I'm like, well, there's very few people left on this planet who knew me, my dad, and my mom in the same context at the same time. And so I had lunch with them. They're an older couple now, and just asked them, like, what was that like? Let me tell you how this story of my mom dying has played out in my life. And could you just shed some light into, like, what do you remember about me that day? What do you remember about my mom? What do you remember about, what my family dynamic was like? Oh. I've learned no family's perfect, right? But so there were some things going on in my family too at that time. That's allowed me again to become more intimate with my story, and how did the death of my mom correspond to acting out and cheating on my wife? Like, I can pretty much straight line it to that point. Yep. And when you were speaking to these people who knew your mom, which I think is just such an awesome way to go about looking at your past and just getting more details and information. I think sometimes when we're in the throes of anything, struggles or addictions, it's exceedingly difficult to kind of get that third sort of outside perspective. And I'm wondering if they were able to share anything with you during that conversation that brought some sense of peace, or was just a really touching note. Yeah. So there's no doubt my mom loved me. That's what I got from this couple and the other people who I talked to. And even just what was I like? What was my demeanor like that day? I mean, of course, confusion. It's like, tell a 5-year-old their mom's not coming home. And I have a 7-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 1-year-old now. So as my kids have kind of gone through these ages, of course, it hits me differently. But just the loneliness and wondering of who loves me is what I felt, what I recall feeling, and what some of these people told me. And again, I think in that core underlying human conversation of will I be loved? I mean, that's what I was seeking. And so on this quest to ask those people that to fill in the gaps, and my therapist even said, I'm like, I don't remember my mom. She's like, well, pretend like you do. What would happen if you pretend like you remember and look in pictures and videos of your mom that you do have? And that was a very helpful exercise for me. And I actually have a video here I'm going to play. Oh. Like I have evidence, I have proof that my mom loved me. My story used to start and stop with my mom died when I was 5, but it hasn't affected me. That was it, because I wouldn't go there. But let me tell you about her. So her name was Nancy Jean Tangen Hamilton. She was born in North Dakota, and she was Miss North Dakota in 1970. Wow. You can Google her, Nancy Hamilton, Miss North Dakota. It's one of the reasons why I'm so good looking is because of my mom.
Obviously.
Yeah, like so cool. And she was a musician. She was a pilot. She rode horses. And unfortunately, her life was cut short in 1990 when she died in a plane crash. And I'm so sad that happened. And I can rest in the assurance that she loved me. And I'm going to prove it to you right now. So this is my mom. She's getting ready to go ride horses. And she picks me up. I'm about 2 years old here. She gives me a big hug. She says, I love you. We'll just let it play 2 times. So good. So like I can watch these videos and see like, yeah, my mom loved me. Look at that. And I do want to show another picture of my mom. This we actually showed at our wedding. So she died in 1990. And these are just a couple pictures I have of her. Beautiful. So she was a pilot. That middle one there is me. She used to let me fly the plane.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So.
Oh, wow. She was probably quite the daredevil. Being a pilot is not for the faint of heart, huh?
Not at all. She did a lot of cool, adventurous stuff. Connecting back to these people in my life who knew her and knew me. And then as I think about the little boy who was so destabilized when he lost his mom as a kid, and then that manifested itself in many unhealthy behaviors, it's like, oh, I can have some empathy and compassion for that boy, for that adolescent, for that teenager, for that adult even, and ultimately culminating in the biggest betrayal that I committed in my life. I'm not saying that that's the reason why, but I didn't just wake up one day and say, oh, I'm going to be addicted to porn and cheat on my wife. Like, that's not how this works. I haven't seen it work in that case. So connecting the whole story, it's like, all right, I can have compassion now. And I can draw other people into that compassion as I sit with them and their stories as well. It's like, I think I've heard it all sometimes, and I do coaching and counseling now and in these groups as well. I think I've heard it all, and then you combine the 3 worst. Oh, there's a new story. I didn't realize you could connect those 3 together. Well, let's talk about where that started. And for me, again, it's this notion of wondering, does anybody love me? But I just proved it to you right there. Like that source of love that I thought was gone wasn't gone, just got cut short.
And I want to thank you for sharing that. Very heartwarming and touching for me to see. So I can only fathom what it was like for you to first watch that video. But I think it's a beautiful testament to helping in the recovery, to your point, that really got to the root. And I think a lot of times with any behavioral addictions, there is a root there. We might not know what it is, but with some self-exploration and courage and bravery, which you've exhibited throughout your struggle, I think it's a beautiful way to really illustrate that. So thank you for sharing that video. It was excellent.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course. What does your life look like now? You've done such an awesome job of describing what it's like to be in the throes of this and how it impacts your relationships. And I know you've got a great support system in the different groups you participate in, a wonderful wife. So I'm wondering, what does your life look like now? And are there any things that you employ on a daily basis to really help reinforce that recovery?
Or I'm realizing, I think it's a life's work, but what's really important and what's not important in life. And for me, it's my family, first and foremost, and making sure that I'm leaving a legacy that I want. And how do I do that? Well, it's leaning into those words I said earlier. I'm a gentle and courageous man, and I'm just up for creating hope and love in the world. I don't bat 1,000 at that all the time, but if I ground myself in those words every day, it tends to produce that or close to that. I run my own business. I run a digital marketing business. And then I'm also, in the past year or so, been branching out into doing coaching, training as a profession. In addition to the work I've done for about the last 5 years, is what I would say like a lay counselor, just someone who likes to get together and help people. But I'm on the path of doing that as a job, as a profession, and creating that. So I do one-on-one coaching, and then I also do trainings. And these experiential trainings or weekend workshops, it's just an opportunity to look at, just like that woman in the marriage workshop I did with my wife, like how many opportunities would there be in life for me to be sitting with my wife, make that asinine comment I did, and then have someone drill into that? Like, that doesn't just happen. And so these workshops that I help facilitate, it just can create an environment for the stuff to come up in life that we tend to just pretend that everything's okay and not dive into it. So that's really my passion, is helping people talk about what we think is taboo that we can't talk about, and then what more is there for people in life. Financially, I sometimes joke in the small groups we talk about the price of our behavior and then the cost. So like maybe how much did it cost, and then also what was the opportunity cost, so to speak. And I joke, I took about a $200,000 a year pay cut when I basically threw my old life away. It's been 5 years, so do the math. It's cost me about $1 million so far. Now it's opportunity cost. I'm not asserting that as fact, but it's like, like money, this keeping up with the Joneses. I'm like, I'm not playing that game anymore. Now, money is important. Don't get me wrong. Like, I want to provide for my house, and we just brought our third kid home 1.5 years ago, so our little house is getting a little tight. So it's like, okay, let's make more money and do it in a healthy way, so we can actually enjoy what we're up to, instead of in a competitive way of showing everybody how awesome I am, because that didn't work very well. Really not that awesome. Life it's definitely harder on this side of the confession and recovery journey. But it's way more authentic, and the impact that I can have on people now is just incredible. I never thought that the guy who was stuck in the pornography addiction cycle and the infidelity shame cycle, I never thought that I could have a positive impact on people, especially dealing with the exact thing that I struggled with. But that tends to be how our stories are used. It's, our greatest strongholds can become a gift if used and rewired in a healthy way. In the series, and neuroscience supports this now in the last 20 years, the neural pathways can get beaten down in such a way. But there is hope to rewire them. And if there's any message I leave with anybody today, no matter what you're dealing with, is that if you're in an addiction cycle, pornography, sexual addiction in particular, that's my lane, it can be undone. Those neural pathways can be rewired. There is hope. It's a 2 to 5 year process is what the data suggests. And here I am 5 years later, I would say, you know what? It's about right. At 2 years, I was like, oh, I think I'm pretty good. And then it's like every 6 months since then, I'm like, oh, wow, got a lot more to unpack. But after 5 years, I'm like, all right, I think I got my brain back to functioning.
That's awesome. And that sort of really answers one of the last questions I had, which on the podcast here, we always like to ask our guests, if you could give a piece of advice to someone who is in the throes of their addiction, who is really, really, really struggling, what would that be?
Oh, man. Can I just talk for like the next hour? Is that okay?
I would love for you to.
No, I think, so with my story, I heard somebody else share their story, a friend of mine, probably 6 or 7 years prior to me confessing.
Yep.
But hearing that story, it was in my head every day of my life. And when I was ready to confess, to come clean, after this weekend workshop, who do you think I called? That guy. Said, hey man, I got a problem. So one, sharing your story, no matter where you're at, is vitally important. But also, there's so many resources to deal with this and other addictions. It's going to hurt, but I would say find help. It is possible with the pornography addiction. I mean, many people, many boys, they get addicted or find it in some way between 8 and 12 years old. And there is a difference between pornography and sexual addiction. I lump them together a lot, but there is a difference. I've dealt with many guys who only deal with porn and some who deal with both. Get help, find the right help, find a group, find somebody who's actually healed or on the path to healing. You know, again, those groups where it's everybody just shows up and confesses every week. If that's the only starting point you have, fine. But just know you can get on the other side of this. You have to be vulnerable and willing to discuss it. And I would also offer, no matter what you're dealing with, this stuff typically starts with some sort of mental, physical, sexual, emotional abuse at a young age, death of a loved one, so unprocessed grief, like for me. And grief can expand. It's not only death or divorce, but typically we think of death and divorce of a loved one or someone close. In an adult male, it could be a divorce that they've experienced themselves. I mean, there's the gamut of things, and it's unfortunately common how these stories manifest themselves. And so, again, what I would offer is you're not alone in whatever you're dealing with. The unhealthy behaviors can go away, and you can get to the other side of it and get help doing it.
Yeah, I found it different in refreshing in a way. I know when I first quit drinking, if I didn't meet a recovering alcoholic and it was just friends and family supporting me, that's great. But sometimes it's hard to tell them the details. They don't want to know the nitty-gritty details. But I think it's the whole concept of, in your case, in my case, we're able to point to someone, literally see someone who was thriving and happy and on the road to recovery and improving their relationships, and really that one-to-one connection with someone who has been down your path or a path similar. So I'm very grateful that you remembered that and hung on to that, because I think sometimes sharing this with certain people is just a bit easier when they've been, down the road you've been on. So I'm glad that you found respite in that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I believe I have this saying that when the student is ready, the teacher will present themselves. So, there's many great tools. I mentioned some here that I'm involved with: coaching, counseling, workshops, etc. I was around all those workshops or those types of tools my whole life, but I wasn't ready. And so, when people are ready, there is help out there. And now some people may not receive you with compassion and empathy, as I'm sure you've experienced with AA and things. It's not always the case. But yeah, I mean, everyone has a story. I believe everyone's story has a purpose, and only you can execute that story the way that you were designed to do. And so let's go. What's standing between you and letting that out?
Yep. And I just wanted to congratulate you on 5 years. That
Thank
is an excellent, big accomplishment. And I'm so happy to have had the time and you taken the time to speak with me, to speak with our audience. I call this the podcast to talk about things nobody wants to talk about, right? Mm-hmm. And I think there's a place in our society where we need that. And we should be talking about things because it helps remove the stigma. And I just appreciate your time and your wisdom and your experience, because all of that will go toward helping erase the stigma. And I like to say courage is contagious. And I certainly feel even a little bit more courageous after you shared your story. I know it takes a ton of bravery to do that. So myself and our audience, I know, are just very grateful for your time. And we really do wish you and your family all the best in the world, and stay in touch.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. Courage is the name of the game. Yeah. Playing this little video of my mom one more time.
Oh, you're really
arrested that. Yeah, but I appreciate it. It's been a pleasure, and yeah, hope it's.
I can see why she was Miss North Dakota.
Exactly. Look at her. She's a knockout.
I mean, good luck. Oh, well, Austin, it's always great when we get to see personal clips. So thank you for sharing that. I know that's difficult as well, but it's been such a pleasure, and I hope you come back sometime. We can talk at further length.
I'd be happy. Thanks again.
Thank you all for joining today's conversation with Austin. He did such a great job really taking us through each and every step in his struggle from the very beginning all the way through to his recovery. You felt like you were really there throughout the whole journey. What I learned, perhaps more than anything else, is that pornography addiction isn't necessarily measured by how much actual time you're spending with that content, but more why you are spending time with it. Is there something in your life you're not particularly interested in dealing with? Is this a distraction? And is the time that you dedicate with that bringing you closer to your loved ones, or maybe pushing them further away? Austin raises a lot of really valid questions. We really hope you enjoyed our conversation. If you visit MedCircle.com, you can access tons of other conversations, including weekly workshops with our credentialed doctors, an award-winning video library, which features almost 1,000 different educational videos. Become a member of our community today. Visit MedCircle.com to learn more. Thank you for listening to It's All in Your Head, and we'll chat next week.